Hi, welcome to Comic Talk. I'm Josh.
And I'm Drew.
And today we're doing a Classic Reads episode. And we're going to be talking about a Batman trade here. This is Batman the Black Mirror.
Hell yeah.
Hell yes. This is Scott Snyder with art by Jock. And then we have one story in here that's done by I can never get his name right, Francesco Francavilla. And this is actually from 2011, so this is a newer trade. But I think this should probably rank up there as a classic read at this point.
I'm sure it will.
You
can't really talk about Snyder's work on Batman without talking about this.
Right,
fairly, so.
Definitely. And this is a good 4, almost 5 years old at this point, at least when it got started.
Yeah, which is weird.
Yeah, it is pretty weird that it's been that long, but it's quite good, so we're going to talk about it.
Deal with it.
Deal with it.
All right, so the first arc that we had in here was the dealer. There's this guy that's selling old contraband from things taken from supervillains like Joker Venom and the elusive crowbar and all that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. So I guess we should start off by talking about the writing.
Mm-hmm. I think one interesting thing here, just to sort of mirror some of the other stuff we've talked about recently, is this is sort of a precursor to this new guy in the new Batman stuff, that the Mr. Bloom, which I think is kind of interesting, being that this is still Snyder back then, and we have sort of a new version of this same idea, but
it's
different.
A little bit different.
But I mean, it's somebody who's buying and selling or sort of working in that sort of way. It's definitely different, but it's interesting that we see Snyder sort of come back to something that feels a little similar.
Yeah, I didn't even catch that. I mean, there are obvious differences. Like the Mr. Bloom comes up with these, seeds or whatever that give superpowers to people that take them, whereas this guy's just stealing Joker Venom and then selling it.
Right.
But it is a very similar concept.
Like the way the story plays out feels a little bit similar, how it slowly builds in a mystery comic sort of way.
For sure.
I really liked this first story. I'll say it's not my favorite of the 3 in here.
I wish it lasted a little bit longer, was my main complaint. There was a lot of room for really dark development. And I feel like he didn't necessarily capitalize on it as much as he could have. I was really hoping for something almost Brubaker-esque, I suppose, when I got to that point. And it does feel a little bit rushed. I feel like that could have been like a good 5-6 issue story.
I thought going into it, after reading just the first one before it says part 1 of 2, part 1 of 3 or whatever, I don't think the first one said 1 of 3 in it, or if it did, I didn't assume that the whole thing was going to wrap up in the 3. I figured that was going to be like the first act of what was happening here.
Right.
So that did surprise me. I thought that this whole book was going to be that story, and it's not. It's only like the first third of this is that story.
Right.
That being said, I didn't mind the faster pace with it. I felt like I got a good bang for my buck out of what I was reading in here.
It does accomplish a lot in 3 issues. Just if it was me personally, I would have slated it for like 5 or 6.
Sure. I can see how it could have gone longer, but I think he made a lot of good choices in this first one where he could have really dove in and sort of gotten to a Jeff Johnsian sort of thing where here's the crowbar and then here's the batarang from this and just thrown out so much garbage and played around with old continuity and old props from old stories just to sort of, wank off to look how much Batman we know and fanboy sort of stuff. And we don't really get that here. They have like one thing.
And then the building. I didn't catch the significance of the building, but apparently there was some significance to that, the venue that they chose for their little swap meet thing.
Sure. I guess what I mean is it was just untasteful, and I didn't feel like that was the point, or the central narrative didn't revolve around needing to know these old continuity things. It didn't really matter. Even the crowbar even comes up that Jason Todd was beat to death with by the Joker. That even comes up, and it doesn't even matter if you know what that is. Like it helps to know.
Yeah.
It adds a little bit of depth, but you didn't need to know it, and it made it clear enough within the context that anybody who isn't aware of that storyline could still follow it.
But on the note of the crowbar, that in that scene we see him sort of make a very, I don't want to say decisive decision, but it definitely changes his perspective on the people in the venue. Like, he wants to think that it's like, little kids daring each other to do something bad, but he has this realization that no, these are seriously some sick motherfuckers.
Right.
That could have been an issue, in my opinion, like a whole issue.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I think it does sort of speak to, I suppose, Scott Snyder's penchant for writing in a storyboarded, cinematic type of way, in that we don't delve quite as deep as maybe some, especially maybe guys from the 80s. We've been doing a lot of stuff from the 80s
we got
recently.
Spoiled with all this O'Neill.
Right, Moore and O'Neill and these kind of things where they'll just sort of dig into the same little bit of character. And, Scott just sort of throws it out there. He says, here's the thing. Now let's move on. Let's get to the action. Let's get to the...
Right.
Let's wrap it up and move to the next thing.
And it is a nice fine line between accessibility and doing the story justice. And I think most of the time he does a pretty good job with that. I mean, of course, like, being absolute comic nerds with our own show about it and stuff, we could absolutely read a whole novel about one of the story arcs. But, if you're like 13, 14 and you pick it up, I think you would enjoy it, just as much as we did. And there's something to be said for that.
Sure. And I think also one of the redeeming qualities here, it does feel like this first story wraps up quickly, but it all does sort of tie in together by the time we get to the end. We'll come back and talk about some of the art and stuff here in a bit, but let's continue forward and talk about the next story arc that we get into. So we get into sort of the first half, I guess, or at least an introduction to James Gordon. Do you have any reference point for this James Gordon stuff at all before you read this?
Before I read it, no. He has showed up in Suicide Squad since then and a couple other titles, but this was my first introduction to him as a character.
I remember hitting some James Gordon bit somewhere in the New 52, I think. Maybe Court of Owls, maybe something we've done since then.
He might have been in there.
Maybe something in the 30s, because we hopped back in, and for our poll list we're doing it, but he's familiar to me, but not really. And I didn't like him too much in whatever else it was. I didn't care, but reading here the beginning of that story, I really got into this character.
This is one of the characters that was definitely done justice. There's a whole bunch of exposition and backstory, and it's wonderful. It's probably one of the best villain expositions that I've seen in quite a while.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. They spend a whole lot of time going back and showing how he was raised and the hints that different people in his life that are in this, because we have Oracle, Barbara, we have Jim Gordon, and those two are really kind of the protagonists of this second/last arc. So how did you feel about the way, first of all, that they broke up this story?
At first it didn't really make sense to me. By the end, I absolutely loved it. It's one of those like longer form stories that, plants some little seeds and, you have a resolution you think, but then a couple issues later when it suddenly comes back to you and hits you in the face and you realize that you were absolutely wrong, it's amazing. And I think one of the things that I really love about this character is, with that villainy and whatnot, the big thing has always been like nature versus nurture, and he's Jim Gordon's son, and he's had like a perfectly fine upbringing, yet he's still a complete psychopath.
I know we're talking about story here, but there is an art element that I think is directly involved with the story that is also good to talk about because it's part of the extras that we get in here, where it actually talks about how the James Gordon character was created. Like the first draft of him looked almost like Ryan Gosling from Drive. Like he was very suave looking. He had a hoodie and he looked like a kind of cool, tough character. And they sort of kept revamping him until he was just a boring, nerdy Jim Gordon light.
Right, yeah. And I think that's probably the creepiest thing about him, is he has such like an everyman kind of look to him.
Yeah, you wouldn't think twice with this guy, which makes him a cool villain.
Right.
Especially being a total psychopath.
Yeah, there's nothing over the top about him at all. He doesn't have a freeze gun. He doesn't wear makeup or have abilities of any sort. He's just a dark motherfucker.
We sort of get that first taste of him. And then from there we move into this other story where we go back to Jock on the art. And we go to this interesting ordeal with the orca whale or the killer whale in the bank.
Yeah.
And we have these two classic kind of Batman villains, the Roadrunner and the Tiger Shark. So how'd you feel about that story?
I think it could have been omitted and I would have been okay with it. It's probably my least favorite in the book, easily.
At the same time that it's probably my least favorite from a real literary writing standpoint, it feels the least necessary and the least invested in character development.
Yeah, I don't really give a shit about.
Right.
Yeah.
You could completely just cut it out of here and this would have been fine. You still would have gotten everything you got. At the same time, I love the way it kind of breaks up this very dark storyline and shows, to me, how Batman has to juggle all these different things happening at once. He doesn't just have this problem with James Gordon and Jim Gordon and Barbara and their whole thing. He's got this other sort of caper, silly, old school style Batman caper that he's having to deal with at the same time. That the stakes are actually pretty high as well. He gets captured at one point. We get a very old school Batman is hung up by his feet. He's tied up, and there's a whale jumping up and trying to bite him. And all the bad guys are still standing around.
Yeah.
And just monologuing about who they are and why they have him tied up and how much better they are than him.
Right.
Which is just a fantastic, old school Batman moment. It's almost Batman 66 in its ridiculousness.
Definitely.
Which I thought was great. It was a fun way to break up this very dark and dreary story.
It also, I would say, helped keep the pace that I would say Snyder is going for, where things do have depth to them, but they still move as fast as possible, that sort of cinematic thing. That being said, again, personally, if it was left out and each of the other story arcs got another issue, I would be beside myself with joy. But,
now, the whole middle of this, though, has a lot of good humor in it. There's a lot of funny stuff that happens.
There's one moment, because this is Dick Grayson Batman, so he has a bit more of a sense of humor than Bruce, but him and, I think Tim, Red Robin, are about to, drop in on some guys, so to speak, and do we know anything about them? He's like, well, they're wearing sunglasses at night, so they're really, really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a great moment. There's also Dick Grayson is in the some bat vehicle, and he's talking to Tim over their secure connection. And he tells him, or Tim asks him, did you think that girl was cute? You got a thing for her? And he's like, no, of course not. He's like, I think you do. And oh, you're breaking up on me. And he's like, this is a 5G secure connection. There's no breaking up. Oh, no, I'm losing you. And he he hangs up on him. That's the sort of thing that you can only get with Dick Grayson Batman. You're never going to get those sort of moments with Bruce Wayne Batman.
Yeah. No.
Which I'd like to let's talk about that a little bit, because this is...
Comparison between the two?
This is kind of the quintessential, I think, Dick Grayson Batman story. This and the Batman and Robin run by Morrison and then Tomasi, I think, are the two main Dick Grayson Batman runs. If you want to know Dick Grayson Batman, you read this and then you read Batman and Robin Volume 1 through 3, and
you're good.
Pretty much got it all.
Yeah.
So how do you feel about that, the Dick Grayson as Batman?
Yeah, I didn't really like it at first because I'm a big fan of the brooding, absolutely hating himself Bruce Wayne Batman. I think it's awesome and completely appropriate for the character. If you're going to paint a portrait of some rich psycho who's running around town with a 10-year-old, beating the shit out of criminals, it makes sense that he would be a pretty dark guy. But I think having Dick Grayson, especially in this story arc, which is pretty dark in itself, almost seemed a little bit necessary. There's got to be something to break up the seriousness at points, and the darkness at points, and it's very entertaining. I would say from a purely entertainment standpoint, Dick Grayson is the more entertaining Batman.
Yeah, you know this, I'm a big fan of Dick Grayson Batman. I love the idea of a compassionate, friendly, all around decently put together nice guy playing the role of Batman. I've always found that to be a really fun and interesting idea. And you know, his father, it's not really his father, but Bruce Wayne is Dick Grayson's father. And so he knows how to pretend like he's Bruce Wayne. He knows how to pretend like he's Batman. He does a really great job of it, but he still bleeds through. And I find that a lot of fun to see him playing the role of Batman and then sort of break character occasionally. And that strange dichotomy, especially the way Scott Snyder manages to play it with the criminals. He'll come to them and he's got that scary Batman, and then he makes a joke. And Snyder, I guess it's probably not Snyder as much as it's the artists here. They usually manage to capture sort of the confusion on the face of the criminals, like what? Like, why is Batman, making a joke here?
I'd say whereas Bruce is primarily Batman and plays Bruce when he has to, Dick's completely the opposite. Mm-hmm. He's Dick Grayson, and he can be Batman if he wants to, but he doesn't have to pretend to be Dick Grayson.
Right. Definitely a different take on the character. But it also, to me, it ratchets up the drama of the Batman sections because I know he's acting. He's playing this part. He's trying to be scary, which I think works really well, especially with the Jock art. Even the cover, if we look at the cover here, and you think about the fact that this is Dick Grayson.
Doesn't make sense.
A humorous, funny guy, right? This isn't... If this was Bruce Wayne, okay, well, that's just the way he is.
Yeah, he probably gets out of bed like that.
Yeah, he just naturally feels this way. But knowing that this is actually Dick Grayson, funny guy, makes jokes, ladies' man, playing this really ratchets up it almost makes it funny in a way to me. I get a little bit of a laugh every time Batman's being scary in this book.
And he's trying to be intimidating because it's like, oh no, I know you.
Yeah, you can just sort of imagine him, his inner monologue here. And sometimes you even get it.
Speaking of, there's a point in here when James Jr. is talking about how when he saw Batman on the news and he was smiling like as he went into battle, and he's like, I know that's not Bruce.
Yeah.
Never seen Bruce smile in my life.
And that's mentioned a few times. There's also Jim Gordon's on the roof, and he bends
turns
down
around and
to
he's
turn
still there.
Yeah, he turns the light off and he turns around and he's shocked because he's still there. And Dick Grayson's like, "What?"
Yeah.
He's like, "I just didn't expect you to still be here." Oh,
sorry. Yeah.
Whoops. And there's a lot of moments like that where Snyder does a good job of bringing that to the forefront and reminding you that this isn't Bruce Wayne in the cowl. It's a completely different person with a completely different personality. So we finish up this arc with the Zucco, Roadrunner, and Tiger Shark. That all sort of ties up exactly how you would expect it.
Yeah.
But in a satisfying, that's exactly what I wanted to happen kind of way that you want with that kind of story, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't bad by any means. I think I was just more frustrated by the whole arc because I was getting so invested in like the darkness and stuff like that. And then again, like you said, at one point he's just dangling above this whale, and it's like, okay, I guess we're doing that now.
Yeah, it's almost straight out of like Austin Powers or maybe a Bond movie might be a more fair assessment. Yeah, but there's definitely intended humor there.
For sure.
But so then we go, as soon as that finishes, bang, we get thrown directly back into James Gordon, the Joker, a very dark, creepy, fucked up Joker in this too. This is not 66 Joker. This is...
No, by any means. Yeah.
This isn't even Christopher Nolan Joker. This is straight Scott Snyder Joker.
Yeah, I've always felt that Snyder's Joker... Well, it's my favorite. I don't feel like anybody writes Joker as well as Snyder does.
Mm-hmm. I think I probably agree. I think the only Joker I like as much as this, and only because it's so different, is the old animated series Joker with Mark Hamill.
Yeah. In my mind, whenever I read Joker, it's still in Mark Hamill's voice.
Even this Joker?
Yeah, I can't.
This is even Mark Hamill Joker?
Yeah.
That's funny. the Hannibal Lecter style approach to Joker in this series is pretty awesome. I like that.
How would you
approach to
describe the Hannibal Lecter style regarding this?
So
it could be taken a few ways.
Okay,
He doesn't actually eat people.
Well, first, that's true. First, just the actual visual representation of the character is straight out of Silence of the Lambs, the film. We have him on the
dolly cart thing.
Yeah, on the dolly, tied to it with the orange straight jacket with the face mask on, and the completely calm demeanor, where his whole intent is just to calmly freak everyone in the room the fuck out. Right? It's sort of classic Hannibal Lecter to me. Is no one else in the room wants to go near him or have to even talk to him just because he's so goddamn creepy, and he just gets under your skin immediately, which
Right.
is the way Joker should be. That's sort of Joker's MO, but I don't feel like that's often shown well. But Snyder manages to just nail it, I think.
Yeah, every time he writes Joker, it creeps me the fuck out. Never fails.
So how about the plot of this last one with James?
I thought it was genius.
I did too.
Just the way it wraps everything up, ties everything together. Seeds that had been planted earlier that you didn't realize were of the importance that they ended up being. Like him being on his meds and everything, and it was awesome. Mm-hmm. It was awesome.
Yeah, this is a storyline where I'm going to have to assume that the people watching this are okay with being spoiled. And so we'll probably add a spoiler tag to this, I think. When we see that James has basically orchestrated this whole thing, how did you feel about that? I thought it was done really well. I did not see it coming, actually, until he revealed it himself.
In the first story arc that we see him in, where he's talking about how he's changed and all that, in the back of my mind was like, okay, bullshit, this isn't going to work out. But the magnitude at which it doesn't work out was absolutely not expecting.
Yeah, me neither. I was pretty shocked. I knew that the conversation that he had with the old bully surely didn't go as well as he was implying it did. Mm-hmm. But when it turns out the dude's in his basement and just hacked up already, that really surprised me a lot and really immediately got me really into the James character. I was like, oh, Jesus.
Not to mention, like, the final-ish scene with Barbara.
Right.
Straight out of a horror movie.
Mm, yeah, very much so.
Yeah, and it actually managed to maintain, and they mentioned this a little bit, but how Barbara always felt that he was scarier than the other villains because he wasn't one to monologue. He was one to where if he just decided that he wanted to kill you, he would walk in and strangle you, and that would be the end of it. And he does have a little bit of monologue in here, but not to the point where it compromised the character, I don't think. Mm-hmm. I think it was almost necessary.
Mm-hmm. And it also helped us feel like Barbara had a little bit of the upper hand as well, which I'd also like to hit on that, because Barbara is shown here as a badass, as being as cool as she really is. She used to be a Batgirl, right? She's supposed to be a badass. Yeah, she's in a chair, but...
Yeah, even in a wheelchair, she can...
Right.
She can fuck some people up.
Yeah, she definitely does. I really loved that she wasn't helpless here. She wasn't shown as the useless handicapped girl. She's female and she's handicapped, and she still does some badass stuff by the end of this book, which I thought was really cool. It was really well done, and it didn't feel trite or...
Yeah, not at all. Throughout the book, she's portrayed as being very intelligent and perceptive and stuff like that, but to make her like an intimidating physical presence on top of that is just awesome.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. I liked that a lot. The ending here, I felt overall wrapped everything up pretty well. It did get a little strange with after she stabs him in the face and he still seems okay, and that was a little weird to me. Did you have any opinion on that? Did that bother you at all?
Not really. She stabbed him in the side of the eye.
That's true. There's not that much going on over there, right?
Yeah, not really. I think it's kind of like the carnival trick where people are like, hammering nails into their nose right here.
True.
Like, dude, there's just fucking nothing back there. You're fine.
Yeah, I guess so.
So I think because of that placement, I mean, if there was a knife handle sticking out of his forehead, I would have been like, okay, bullshit. Yeah, in the Escape from Arkham animated movie that came out, there's a point where Joker and Deadshot are fighting, and Joker stabs him like a couple, it had to be like 10-inch knives, like straight in his back, and then like he comes back and fights after that, and it's like, that's bullshit. He's got 2 fucking punctured lungs. Dude is done.
Sure.
Like, there's no coming back from 2 punctured lungs. But I felt that it was believable in here.
Okay. For me, I felt like a lot of that arc was very very toned down. So to me, it kind of bothered me for some reason. It almost pulled me out a little bit, but it's a minor gripe. I just wondered if that bugged you at all when it happened, but I guess not. So let's talk then. We've been going a while, but we have to talk about some of the art in here before we finish this up. So
yeah, especially because we just did White Chicks, which had the same artist and writer.
Right. So yeah, when we did Witches Volume 1, it was Scott Snyder and Jock. So that's a big part of why we went ahead and moved to this classic read now, while that was still fresh in our heads. So first, which one from both a writing and an artistic perspective do you feel like you enjoyed more?
This one.
Same here.
Yeah.
And for me, with the art, the surprise for me was this other guy, Francesco Francavilla. I really liked the Jock stuff. I'm a fan of Jock's work. I think
he's a great artist.
He has a really good eye for giving a good angle on the scene and giving you sort of a unique perspective on things that pulls you in. But I think Francavilla actually stole the show here. I loved almost everything he did in here. I was really drawn to the work that he did.
I think the big thing that separates them is I think Francavilla is maybe better at coloring. Mm-hmm. Just the way that the colors laid on the pages and sort of separated moods and tones and stuff like that was very, very impressive. Mm-hmm. And Jock is pretty good at that too. But I feel like, Francesco just knocked it out of the park.
Yeah, definitely. And he just has an interesting sort of signature look to the stuff that he did in here that doesn't quite feel... It feels less comic book. It feels almost like it was done for the trade. It feels like a graphic novel in that it's kind of off-kilter, I suppose. I can see...
Unpolished in a cool way, maybe?
Yeah, it's almost got an indie vibe to it. But yeah, unpolished might be a good way to put it. It's just not quite standard comic book fare, which I always find interesting.
Right. And coming back to Jock, I was trying to remember, because in Witches, they had that sort of splattery thing laid over everything. But everything behind that was, kind of, I don't want to say standard comic bookish, but, it's believable comic bookish. Mm-hmm. You showed somebody a picture, they'd be like, oh, that looks like a comic book. So I think if you sort of took out that layering effect, they're pretty similar between these two books. Mm-hmm. There were some very disturbing points that he illustrated quite wonderfully. It does get pretty scary at points. And I mean, given Batman is not inherently a horror novel, but there are horror elements to it. And I think he illustrated that very, very well.
Yeah, I think so too. Maybe suspense thriller might be a good way to describe this, yeah. Not quite horror. There are some horror elements, though, aren't there?
Elements,
with like the man-bat stuff that kind of comes in here. And
just little things. Like, I think this is actually maybe one of Francavilla's, but there's a scene where this rat is just eating this bird's nest. Just creepy and gross and weird, and
Yeah, I wonder with some of that kind of stuff, how much... I always wonder this with these things, how much that was Scott Snyder's direction and how much that was... the artist bringing in.
Yeah, and you can see some of the bonus features on the back of this here. There is quite a bit of just Snyder's directions, like a script, and he does give quite a bit of directions to the artist. I mean, obviously we don't have the whole thing, so we can't say for sure, but I think he definitely went into it with a good mental image of what Snyder was going for.
This is a really cool Batman book.
Yeah, it's a classic.
I think it is a classic. If for no other reason than it's kind of the quintessential run of the Dick Grayson Batman, I think this will probably go down as a classic. We will, in 5 to 10 years, when people ask what they should read for this time frame, I think this one is going to come out, get recommended quite a lot.
Mm-hmm, for sure. Yeah, I don't even want to check and see how much these original issues are going for. I bet it's like $1 million.
It's probably ugly already, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's Wednesday night. I get it up by midnight usually.
Okay, so that makes sense. All right, well, I guess that'll wrap this up for us. Go ahead and check us out next Wednesday night, Thursday morning, where we'll do another poll list review of this week's comics that we poll ourselves. We read them and review them. Thus the name. You're freaking me out over there, man. Next Monday, you can come back and check out our monthly review, where we'll go back over all of our top picks and our not-so-top picks. We'll talk about what we're going to drop.
Escape from New York.
Which will be Escape from New York. I'll tell you that already because we both hated it. I think there might be one or two others. And we're going to talk about what we'll pick up as well, considering, is it next month? August, September. It is next month, right? Where we start seeing these new Marvel titles. So we're going to have a lot to talk about. So check back on Monday and we'll talk about all of the stuff we're going to pick up, the changes we're going to make. It might be a little bit drastic this month.
Could be.
Dun, dun, dun. Can we sing the thing about comments and all that? No, let's not do that. So just comment. We're not going to sing about it. Tell us if there's anything else that we should read, if there's anything you'd like us to review. If we like your comment, we might even talk about it at the end of an episode coming up. And also, for our poll list, let us know if there's any issues that are starting up that we just absolutely have to read, because we're still making those determinations as we speak. We do not have that set in stone, so your input could change what we read.
See ya.